Next, we'll go on to item H, and this is a request to amend the STIP, and it has to do with the 97 Spanish Hollow at Trout Creek Bridge project. Mr. Mather, I believe we have a bit of a preamble that we want to set in terms of context on some of the challenges that we are experiencing, and then Mr. Bryant, I'll turn it over to you. Is that
yeah,
okay,
correct.
Wonderful.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Beatty, members of the Commission, Paul Mather, Highway Division Administrator. I'm just going to give you a little bit of background on the bid environment that we're experiencing, and just I guess just some overall context as we get into the next actually several items in front of you. We've had, I don't know, just turning maybe the clock back to last spring, as we've had conversations with you around what projects that you want to see. There's been a desire for increased scrutiny or look at our work from accountability, to make sure that from a commission to a staff that you're doing your role in due diligence and looking at projects. So we've had that dynamic in conversation playing out with you as far as which projects you want to see and what the letters and so forth look like. The other dynamic that's happening is just the complexity of our projects are getting more and more complex. We've talked to you about the ADA issues that have entered into our projects, the traffic issues you're going to hear some about today, and the complexities of finding work windows to do work in water work periods from the environmental side. All those increase risk, increase cost, and many of those, ADA is probably the most tangible one, were scoped into the original project. So we've got that dynamic going on, and we've explained to you kind of on a project by project basis what that looks like, and you're going to hear more about that in the projects today. The new dynamic now that enters and makes this conversation even more challenging is the bid environment that we're in. We pulled some data that I saw just yesterday, looking back to October, where we saw a departure in what we expect in prices, commodity prices, unit bid prices on our projects have made a significant departure from where we would expect to be or what we had anticipated being on our cost of our projects. And that curve looks to be headed on an exponential uptick of a trajectory. Now, is that a spike? Is that a 3-month anomaly? Is it a start of a 2 or 3 year trend? Those are all questions we don't know. But in conversations with contractors, in our own look around the market, the amount of work that's out there on the market right now is extremely high. Not just in the public sector. BPA has a lot of work. There's a ton of work in the private sector. And the work that we have from a margin standpoint for contractors is on the low end of that work that's out there. So we're not the most attractive work with the requirements that and the complexities that I described with our projects that we're experiencing. Other requirements already built into federal funds, built into state contracting, does not make us the most simplest, maybe the most attractive or least risk for contractors. For the first time, in a long time, just in the last 6 months, we put 2 bids out for projects and got no bidders on. One of those you're going to hear about today that we actually went out and had to rebid, and the cost came in higher. Those projects are, again, the riskier projects. One of the things that we've been working on as we've had this conversation the last 6-9 months, and our scoping efforts and doing a better job clear back into scoping, is identify risks on projects and making sure we've got the appropriate costs associated with those risks, but just simply identifying the projects with the most, that have that higher level of risk. So 82nd Avenue, doing work on 82nd Avenue in Portland, we know is going to be a risky project. So let's don't treat that from a cost standpoint the same way and lump it in with the same cost and everything. Let's identify that separate and identify the appropriate costs and percentages, similar to what you heard this morning as we were working through 205 and some of the analysis that was done from costs on that. So separate out those riskier projects. The ones you're going to hear about here in a minute would have been identified earlier on just from the work that we've identified that we need to do for various aspects of the projects, why they would be riskier projects. So let's identify those clear up front in scoping and hopefully carry that all the way through. Just back to the overall cost to our program and the cost trends that we're seeing in the marketplace. We had a long conversation just yesterday in trying to develop some strategies, both short-term and long-term, how we can navigate through this. So we're not bogging down your agendas every month with each of these agenda items and trying to do it at least in a more efficient manner for us as staff and you as commissioner to navigate through this. Look longer than just month to month, but let's look at least through this bidding season and develop some strategies, at least in that time frame, to navigate through this. We think in terms of federal fiscal years or bidding season, so we started a process to do that look and come back with some strategies and recommendations on how we can approach individual projects in our various programs if this trend that we're seeing since October truly becomes, which we think it will, a longer-term trend in cost to our programs. So that's some bigger picture, kind of some background for the commission before we get into some of the individual projects and hopefully set some context for those.
Do we have questions on that kind of overarching discussion around the bidding trends? Okay, thank you. Please.
Chair Boehne, members of the commission, my name is Bob Bryant, the region manager for the Central Oregon region. And with me, Bert Hartman from our headquarters bridge section here to make a request for an increase in funding for the US 97 Spanish Hollow Creek project. This is essentially a seismic retrofit project that involves 7 bridges in the Spanish Hollow Creek Canyon, which is immediately north of Biggs, where US 97 intersects I-84, and from that intersection south to the top of the grade there at Spanish Hollow, and includes one additional bridge at Trout Creek, which is a little further south on US 97. Brings those 7 bridges in the Spanish Hollow Creek Canyon and Trout Creek Bridge up to a Phase 2 seismic resiliency standard, and initiates our process of bringing a seismic resilient corridor for US 97 from Columbia River Gorge south to the California border. So this is our first major investment in seismic resiliency, and one of the projects that falls under the scenario that Paul just described. We opened bids for this project in December, on December 21st. We had 8 bidders. 5 bidders the 5 low bids were reviewed, and all fell within 8 percentage points of the low bid, but the low bid was 26% above our engineer's estimate. So Bert and his crew have done a lot of work to analyze the bids and the engineer's estimate for the project. We believe that based on what Paul just described, what we're seeing is that bids that we received were essentially a reflection of the current market. This is one of those unique projects in several aspects. It is a challenging corridor. It's a fairly tight little canyon up through Spanish Hollow Creek, where you leave Biggs and head south on US 97 with very limited access at each of the 7 bridge sites up through the canyon there. It's fairly steep, and given the nature of the seismic work that's being proposed here, challenging for any contractor. And so we suspect that each of the bidders incorporated a certain amount of risk into a number of bid items. So it was difficult to target any one particular item as to a cause for the 26% increase over our engineer's estimate. Typically, as Paul points out, our engineer's estimate are based on historic bid prices. We maintain that data, analyze that data regularly, update our unit prices so that we can keep current when we're putting together estimates, especially at this final stage of putting projects together. But we do lag in that process by the fact that we're looking back at recent historic bid prices to establish unit prices for our estimates. We lag a little bit with the market as it moves forward. So we're in that seem to be in that process right now. As I mentioned, the increases are spread across a number of the bid items. There are a handful of items, I think, that we attributed a significant amount of the increase to. Mobilization, general excavation, again, very difficult in the canyon. Shoring and cribbing was 85% above what our engineer's estimate was. The deck concrete, the particular material that we're proposing for this particular project, was 37% above our engineer's estimate. And just general construction for structural concrete, 97% over our engineer's estimate. So pretty difficult to put our fingers on. And again, many of the costs being spread across a multitude of the bid items. You've got a pretty complete description of the background in your packet, but between Bert and I, we'd be happy to answer any specific questions you might have.
So, great report. I really appreciate the level of detail and what you did to bring us up to speed. Don't see that with all of them, so I appreciate that very much. The one question that I had is one of the funding areas that you propose to take money away from is the Bridge Creek Bridge. And I may have misread it, not read the detail that you provided, but what's the impact to not moving forward with that bridge? You're continuing with design, I see, but not with the construction aspect.
Correct. Bert, do you want to?
I can get this microphone working.
See, it's not just me.
There you go.
Chair Benny, members of the commission, this is Bert Hartman. And the Bridge Creek Bridge was programmed for replacement at the last part of this STIP cycle. We'll just turn it into a shelf project. Well, every intent to get that at the first part of the next STIP cycle. So essentially, we'll just use some funding from the next STIP cycle. That won't affect the bridge replacement at all, really. It'll be essentially the same season. This bridge does need to get replaced. It's a concrete bridge, significant cracking between the girders and the deck, so it's really not working like it was designed. And there's some serious scour problems. The stream has realigned itself, and between the scour problems and the cracking problems, the bridge needs to get replaced. We'll just turn it into a shelf project and treat it like any other shelf project.
So from a prioritization perspective, you feel that moving that money, the greatest priority is in this corridor than it is over the other? Essentially, those are the conversations that we're having and the choices we're having to make with limited resources, so.
Well, this bridge was a priority for the 1821 STIP, and will continue to be a priority. We'll just get it in the first part of the next step.
Okay, please. Okay, I have a question about the phasing piece. So, because it isn't necessarily an all or nothing. This process in terms of contracting and bidding laws, we would need to, I forget the actual terminology, but essentially deem that this is
Responsive?
not responsive. If we were to stop the process and make them into individual projects to be able to rebid them differently. Is that an option or no?
No, not exactly. We've deemed the low bid responsive. It's a responsive bid to the bid packet that we advertised. So we've got responsive bids and a responsive low bid for the project. But by the fact that it's 26% above what we had programmed for the project, that could be the basis for ODOT to reject all bids and go back and develop a different project that would fall within our available programmed dollar amount.
Okay,
So it would be a matter of not approving additional funds today that would require ODOT then to go back and reject the bids, or substantially change through contract change order those elements that would bring the project back within the programmed amount.
Okay, so tell me the unintended consequences of going a route of which we deem this beyond our budgetary constraints by the 26%, needing to bid it different or look at the project itself differently.
Sure.
I suspect being in the same corridor in this same area with all the complexities that I read, tell me why that makes sense versus to go forward than it does to make this into individual projects and bid it differently within the dollars that we have available today.
Sure. Chair Boehne, I suspect your suspicion is correct in that, we packaged up 7 bridges in the Spanish Hollow Creek Canyon and even added the Trout Creek Bridge, which is a short distance further south on US 97, to gain some economy of scale in the overall program and the overall budget. And I think we achieved that with projects like this where we've got similar work and various elements. If we're able to package them up into a singular project, there's probably a critical threshold there, but if we can make a competitive bid package and bring that economy of scale by pulling together multiple elements, in this case multiple bridge projects into one contract, there's a benefit to our overall program. By separating them back out, you just get the opposite of that. We would suspect at this point, unless it is just a short-term trend where we're seeing these above average unit prices, that if we were to break it out into individual projects or a multiple of phases, that the overall cost would be something similar or perhaps even greater than what we've experienced here by putting all of these bridges under one contract. Because you'd have mobilization, you have the same traffic control, same project elements in each individual bridge project, or depending on how you package them up differently, it would look similar. There's no real design options that Bert's team or the project team were able to come up with that could substantially reduce the overall cost of the project, whether it was let as a unit such as we've got in front of you today, or broke up into separate pieces. Okay. So, and there's added impacts, of course, when we break up or phase projects into multiple different projects with mobility, because we're disrupting traffic this season for the first phase, and next year or 2 years from now for the next phase, and so on and so forth. So, we're trying to minimize those types of impacts while also being very cost effective with the elements that we bring together. Bert, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on it.
Thank you.
And Chair Boehne, I think, Bob, if you were to take one of those 7 bridges away, you're not going to get 100% of the impact of one bridge.
Yeah, right.
So I think in doing this and putting one particular project on the shelf, although, okay, we had priorities for a reason, but I understand moving forward with the combined 7 projects, rather than taking one of those bridges out and reducing the project scope, you're probably going to have a better bang for the buck later on.
Excellent. I just want us to be able to have that conversation about making sure that that's
makes good sense.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Please. So we feel ready?
Well, I hope you guys in talking about this aren't actually opposed to it, because I want to demonstrate my statewide perspective in voting or in requesting that we approve an amendment to the 2018-2021 statewide transportation improvement program to increase funding for the US 97 Spanish Hollow and Trout Creek Bridges project by $5,947,025.
So in recognition that there are other areas outside of Region 1, are there other comments or discussion? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye. They're picking on me, Bob, not you.
It's an inside joke. All right. Thank you very much. So next item on the agenda, we have item I, which is another request to amend the STIP. And this one in reference to, let's see, where am I? Here we go. Looks like Interstate 205 and Johnson Creek to the Glen Jackson Bridge. Please.
Thank you, Chair.
Speaking of Region 1,
Speaking of Region 1, here we are.
Yes.
Here we are. Chair Boehne, members of the Commission, it's Brian Winsheimer, the ODOT Region 1 Manager, here to talk about the I-205 Johnson Creek Boulevard to Glen Jackson Bridge project. The project before you includes paving all lanes of I-205 Johnson Creek Boulevard to Glen Jackson Bridge, and the construction of 2 auxiliary lanes within the project area with enhanced funds. The contract requires a substantial amount of work to be completed this summer to allow for coordination with our HB 2017 auxiliary lane trigger project, which is going to be going to bid later this year and must be constructed prior to December 1st of 2019, or we will have to forego a 2-cent gas tax increase that is dependent on the completion of that project on time, which of course adds to the coordination and risk factors associated with the project. As the letter for this agenda item describes, the lowest bid we received on the I-205 Johnson Creek Boulevard to Glen Jackson Bridge was within $1 million of our programmed amount for construction, but that bid was rejected for failure to complete the entire bid packet. The next lowest bid came in at $3.5 million over our programmed amount. Following bid opening, the ODOT Office of Project Letting conducted an independent analysis of the bid items, including an evaluation of each item, the bidding competition, the quality of the bidding documents. That analysis supports a recommendation to award the contract consistent with our standards of practice and FHWA guidance. The first step in proceeding with that award is to seek your approval to amend the STIP to account for that $3.5 million. As Paul described earlier in the agenda item, there are a number of factors that are contributing to higher bid prices over the last few months, including the very tight labor market, increased bid item costs, increased risk for contractors in meeting specific interim completion dates like this project has, and also maintaining mobility in these particularly high volume corridors. There's a lot of information in the letter. I hope to provide some additional context, as well as I brought David Kim, who's our Region 1 Project Delivery Manager, with me here today to help answer any questions you may have about all 3 of the agenda items coming up here as they relate to Region 1 projects. So with that, I'd like to ask approval of the STIP amendment and be happy to answer any questions you may have.
I do want to underscore that I think the cover letters are getting better and better from all the regions, and I really appreciate, because that helps us really get to the meat of what the issues are. So are there specific comments or questions about this particular STIP amendment? Okay. Seeing none, I would welcome a motion.
Madam Chair, I move that the 2018-21 statewide transportation improvement program be amended to add $3.545 million to the construction phase of the Interstate 205 Johnson Creek Boulevard to Glen Jackson Bridge project.
Okay, further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Anyone opposed? Okay, all right. Okay, okay, moving right along. Let's go on to item J and another request for an amendment. So please.
Yes, thank you, Chair Bainey, members of the Commission. The OR 213 Lindy to King project is primarily a paving project on 82nd Avenue, but it also has some sidewalk infill and 40 ADA ramp upgrades. Last winter, the severe winter weather deteriorated the pavement condition to the point that it now requires much more substantial rebuild than was originally planned. In addition, high traffic volumes, high bike and pedestrian volumes, and the number of ADA ramps in this high visibility corridor create serious traffic staging and temporary pedestrian accommodation challenges for the contractor. Due to that poor pavement condition, we actually attempted to advance this project and did put it in the bid, did put it out to bid in June of last year, but we did not receive any responsive bids. At the end of November, we rebid the project and received 4 bids. The lowest bid was rejected as a result of not meeting our DBE contract requirements. The second lowest bid came in at $1.643 million over our programmed amount. Again, although the bid was 21% higher than our engineer's estimate, the Office of Pre-Letting conducted its analysis of the bidding items consistent with what I described before and recommended award. It's also worth noting that the third and fourth bids came in at 31% and 53% higher than our engineer's estimate, respectively. With Commission approval, we recommend allocating project savings from the Mount Hood Safety Project to fund this construction project. And again, we're happy to answer any questions.
Okay. A couple questions just really quickly out of the gate. So the material cost that you note, is that in additional material required, or so that's a scope issue, or was that a price increase, a unit?
It's reflected as a price increase in terms of the amount that we're paying for that particular item. Although some of these numbers can be a little bit challenging in terms of when you start talking about how much more is it for asphalt, because sometimes bidders will bid in like $1 for asphalt, for example, and then put their risk in other areas of the project. So this is in comparison to our engineer's estimate versus what that particular bidder was. If you were to do that analysis with some of these other bids, you get different numbers.
Okay. Commissioner Brown?
So I appreciate, again, the level of detail in the project reporting. It was interesting to note on some of your cost savings, the oil price went down. I would love to see that as a trend. It probably is not. And then just because I know it's January, you probably mean 18, not 17 on the second page. You're going to let the contract this January, like this month, right? Okay, just want to make sure. With a 50% increase in that construction, that's huge. And I do hope that, I understand seeing this go out to bid, not getting any bidders, that's one of the most frustrating things you can have. I understand that. So hopefully we'll get better as we go.
Okay. Was that a motion?
I can do that. So, Madam Chair, I move approval to amend the 2018-21 statewide STIP to add $1,449,007 to the construction phase of Oregon 213.
Excellent. Further discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. All right, let's go on to item K, STIP amendment.
Thank you, Chair Boehne, members of the Commission, Ryan Wincham, Region 1 Manager. And I've asked Jackie to share some materials with you related to this particular agenda item as we explain some of the challenges associated with staging, some of the traffic impacts of it. This is one of those projects that we were having conversations about, would like to put before you in terms of just informational as it relates to the potential impacts that this project may have to traffic in Region 1, and you're likely to know about it and hear about it and see it. So this is an opportunity for us to share that information as we talk about the request that's before you today. So unlike the previous two agenda items, this project has not yet gone to bid. We're here with the Commission today to add necessary project elements such as the additional bridge rail work, protective screening for ramps over the UP main line, railroad flagging activities, and to increase traffic control and public involvement activities. The I-84 Banfield interchange consists of 4 concrete ramps connecting 2 high-volume interstates with very high traffic volumes. And in the westbound direction from 33rd to I-5 is actually some of the highest volumes in the state. The project involves the closure of 4 high-speed ramps between I-84 and I-5. 3 of the 4 ramps are full closures, which may be closed up to 12 days each, and one of the ramps, which will be closed for just one night. While we're fortunate to have I-405 as a detour route for the 2 closures of the eastbound ramps, the westbound ramps, which are currently provide 3 lanes, will be necked down to 1. As you can imagine, this project is going to have significant traffic impacts. The plan for these impacts is to have the construction office working on this project and other projects similar to this, the I-205 project as well, to help coordinate activities. And a lot of coordination with MODA Center, Rose Quarter, City of Portland, the Mobility Committee, and others as we try to deal with the traffic. And we explored a very high number of alternatives and options, but there's really no, as I described, pain-free alternative. So as a result, we're having to increase the traffic control and the public involvement resources to maintain safety and create that awareness with the public and encourage them to take mass transit or other routes to get to their destinations. The good news is that these improvements have an anticipated useful life of up to 30 years, so we will hopefully not be back having to talk about these deck ramps for quite a while. Of the $1.7 million being requested, approximately $685,000 is for that additional bridge rail work I mentioned, $450,000 is for that protective fencing and railroad flagging, about $344,000 is for additional traffic control associated with closing all of the on-ramps and managing traffic during these periods, and $150,000 for public involvement and awareness. And while it's extremely difficult to predict how these bids will come in, the team has taken steps to adjust cost of items that they have good recent bid data on, and they have adjusted those as reflected in this. But many bid items, particularly the risk associated with the complex traffic control of this project is going to be very difficult to know until those bids come in. The additional of these funds will allow that project to go to bid and represents the best estimates we have at this time.
Okay. Do you have questions? Please.
Mr. Winsheimer, could you explain, so when the ramps are closed, so if someone traveling toward Portland on I-84, hoping to go south on I-5, would they then be forced to go north up over the Fremont? Is that, am I
Yes.
understanding the traffic pattern correctly? So they'd come off of 84, head north briefly on 5, go over the Fremont, connect to 405, and then come back to 5.
That's correct, and that's what I meant by, and that's
Okay.
the fortunate amount. The detour is that there is actually a detour that is viable. One of the pieces that I wasn't not sure I'm clear about was one of the traffic mitigation options that we were undertaking as part of this is to close the on ramps to I-84. So unless you're coming from 205, you won't be able to get on 84, which will hopefully minimize the number of folks that are trying to get into that very small one lane of traffic that's doing that northbound loop in addition to the northbound traffic. And those are also the folks who have a better opportunity to use some of the surface streets to get to their destinations or to get to I-5 another way.
Yeah, I think one of the key things here is just the communication plan, right? Because this is going to tie things in knots in a huge way, and in an area that's already tied in knots. And I think how we communicate and how we create alternate sources and encourage, max line use and et cetera. I just think we really have to communicate effectively on this one. We'll hear lots of it, I'm sure.
I appreciate that, and I would also add in we have things like Hood to Coast and a range of other activities that are happening in between when some of these closures are happening, and so that's the necessity around these interim completion dates that really do limit that amount of time the contractor's allowed to keep those ramps closed so that we can continue to sort of meet those other objectives that we have.
Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Brown and then Commissioner Simpson.
So just one note, Madam Chair, we did get public input from an
Thank you.
individual, Kathleen Ewell, just reminding us that these 4 items, and they're only the 4 that were not on consent, total quite a bit of money. And when you look at the overall budget increases, I appreciate that this one's coming before bids. I hope it's the last time we see it, and we don't see it post-bid also. And I think we are in a different environment right now, but it does remind all of us to look at making sure we're consistent with our processes, making sure that we put real alternatives on the table, not ones that you couldn't do, wouldn't meet the requirements. Because there is going to be a time when we're going to have to make some pretty significant trade-offs. The bridge that Bob's group said, we've got to put this one on the shelf. We're going to have to do that because there's money allocated for roadway, there's money allocated for other modes of transportation. And it is all of Oregon, it's all the transportation projects. And I think the comments that were noted, although I don't agree with every bit of it, the comments noted, I agree with. We've got to take care of the entire transportation system. So thank you for bringing these. Hopefully I won't see you again on this one. I know I'll see you again.
Commissioner Simpson.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. You had indicated just a second ago 150,000 for community outreach. Is that like a hired consultant in terms of putting together like community organized events that kind of work on the messaging, or is that something that we handle internally in terms of the messaging on the impacts of the project itself?
Yeah, and Commissioner Simpson, it is both our open houses, and so the kind of activities that we do outreach to the public around, and it's also going to be, in this case, a media effort in terms of reaching out and trying to make sure that there's an awareness. In this particular case, we have 3 separate closures with 3 separate detours that have different impacts on different folks. It's going to be extremely difficult to try to make sure that we're able to maintain, the public's attention other than it's bad, and hopefully being able to educate them about when that particular ramp that's going to be impacting them is going to happen. And so it's requiring a bit more of that effort. And I'm not 100% certain if we're outsourcing most of that or if we're doing it in-house. David, do you happen to?
Got it.
Commissioner Simpson, most of the public involvement efforts will be handled in-house. We may use consultants to help with advertising. There's also going to be a series of meetings with stakeholders, continued updates with the mobility committee, with emergency service providers, as we approach that first closure, which will be in July.
Great. And I'm assuming you probably took into consideration all the other impacts related to costs from the previous agenda items that are prior to this one when you were putting together these numbers, correct?
Commissioner Simpson, that is correct. For the areas where we have recent bid items, we've been using those estimates. For other areas like traffic control, that's a little more of an unknown because this is such a complex traffic control project in itself.
Great. And I would assume, lastly, sorry, that there's a lot of coordinated efforts with our stakeholders at Metro, because the convention center, Rose Quarter, obviously event centers and that things of that nature that would hopefully get people to look at other modes of transportation as opposed to relying on the highway system in the event of while this project is taking place.
Yes, we did that initial outreach. We've done additional outreach as our traffic scenarios sort of came into place in terms of being able to share that information with them, and it was going to continue to be ongoing as we get into having the contractor on board and starting to get even more information about how they're actually going to be staging that. So yes, it will continue.
Thanks.
Madam Chair, if I may, Ryan and David, if you could, there's another significant stakeholder who's been involved, and that's the freight community. This is obviously a significant freight corridor with high volumes. Why don't you share the conversation that has played itself out specific to freight mobility?
Commissioner, Chair Boehne, members of the Commission, with the Freight Mobility Committee, they had strong concerns about the impacts these closures would have to freight. There's not a lot of good alternate routes for freight. They had initially expressed to ODOT that they wanted a full closure of I-84 and lessen the pain of the closure. And the response ODOT had was, when you have 86,000 cars that use I-84 today, and now we're putting them on surface streets, there were other issues with increased delay and congestion and safety, and now you got trucks and cars going through neighborhood streets. So they expressed concerns and reservations about keeping I-84 open, but they, after the meeting the other day, they went ahead and approved the process for moving forward. What they wanted to know is specific to when these closures were going to take place so they can do proactive outreach to their constituents about when these closures are going to take place and avoid the area. And there's been extensive work with the law enforcement community. When these closures take place, we're going to have additional incident responders and maintenance patrols out there to help facilitate movement of traffic as well. We've also partnered with the City of Portland in signal timing. So signal timing is going to be a big deal on these city streets. We're not dictating a specific detour route. We're going to allow the users of the system to figure out what route works best for them.
Please.
So when this is constructed, to what extent are you going to use off-peak construction scheduling and ways to reduce? I mean, it's busy there constantly, but it's busier during the morning, evening commutes.
Right. And that was one of the things that one of the reasons this is so impactful is we looked at everything from what could be done just doing it at night, but you couldn't do that when you have concrete curing. So the approach of up to 12-day closures for each of those ramps was the most effective alternative for allowing them, the contractors, to quickly get in and get their work done, safety of having the corridor closed, and overall operations from a system-wide perspective. So they're going to be working 24 hours a day, 12 days in a row, so around the clock in order to get that work done in those closure areas. So it's not just morning or evening; it's going to be all day But those impacts then extend across that day as well during those high congestion periods, and there will be significant congestion as a result. It makes me think of the Trunnion project that is coming up, and while that project is also going to have significant impacts, it's actually going to have a shorter duration because it's one area as opposed to these 3 ramps that each require their own curing period. So when, for example, Freight was talking about things like, well, why don't you just close the freeway? There were some benefits of that, but you still had a significant amount of cure time and other things that didn't reduce the duration as much as you might hope.
So what's the traffic pattern when you close D? I understand the curing issue with concrete, so.
Yeah. And the good news in the, as it relates to D is that is the one ramp that we're going to be closing only for one
day.
night.
Okay.
And when that happens, what we do is we use those advanced warning signs that allow and direct folks to use 405 to go around and come back down and use the southbound ramp. That's challenging during high volume times since it is a 1-lane ramp, and that's already a very congested spot. But over a 1-night period, we've done that in the past in order to address other issues and haven't seen significant issues.
It's really your only option because you're not going to dump it onto Water Avenue in the Central Industrial District on the east side, so you've got to take it off on the other side of the river.
Right. Yes.
Great. Other questions or comments? All right, I'd welcome a motion.
All right, one of us has to do it. We're all going to hear from this one, but all right. So this is request approval to. This is item I, right?
I think we're on K.
Okay, sorry. Request approval to amend 2018-21 statewide transportation improvement program to increase the funding for the construction phase of Interstate 84 and Interstate 5 Banfield Interchange project.
Excellent, thank you. Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. So of course, we'd reach out to our travel partners as well, those that are booking large events and all of that good stuff. Okay, great. All right, so next we have the consent agenda, and I understand that we may want to remove item 8, or I would and pull that forward to the full agenda, or are the, okay, please.
Madam Chair, I think we have 2 questions. I think the first issue is item 3. Commissioner
Okay.
Van Broeklen has expressed a need to recuse himself.
Okay,
But before we move, I defer to Commissioner Brown on item consent calendar 8. How would you like to handle that?
So item 8, I don't need to remove it, just a comment for the record is this is an after the fact approval, which I am not in support of doing that. After hearing some of the comments from Mr. Mather and others before the meeting, I understand the necessity to do this. I can leave it on and begrudgingly approve, although, again, I don't like the after the fact approvals. I'd like to make one comment on item 4.
Okay.
I think it provides significant information to all of us. I think that's something that, just to highlight all of the things that ODOT does that we don't ever see. So item 4, I appreciate how it was written. I appreciate the information. I'd like to see how the Origo program could grow and how we get more volunteers to do that. So I just wanted to make that comment as well. Thank you.
So, Madam Chair, with that, what I would suggest is let us take consent calendar item 3 first.
okay,
Acknowledge, and you can call on Commissioner Van Broeklen to recuse himself. And it's my understanding you wish to recuse yourself.
That's correct. My law firm may represent one or more clients involved in these right-of-way acquisitions, so I'm going to recuse myself from the deliberation and vote on item 3.
okay. So I will pull forward for the full agenda for item 3 and take that separately. I would welcome a motion on item 3, which is requesting approval to adopt resolution for authority to acquire real property by purchase, condemnation, agreement, or donation.
So moved.
Okay, further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions?
Abstain.
Okay, excellent. Now I would take the consent calendar as amended, with item 3 having been already approved.
Madam Chair, I move to approve the consent agenda as amended.
Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay, next item on our agenda is a work session, and so I would like to adjourn unless there is anything else for the good of the order for this particular part of our meeting. Okay, so I will adjourn this portion of the meeting, and we will